Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, the mayor of Grande Prairie on access to health care and the training of medical students locally. But first, from follow to the situation in Venezuela to the resignation of a UCP cabinet minister. Let's kick off the program with tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, former MLA Karen McPherson, and Graham Thompson is a longtime political columnist in the province. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with building reaction to the American capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Here's what the Prime Minister was saying today while in Paris.
We welcome the prospect of peace, a peaceful transition, democratic Venezuela. We welcome the prospect of greater prosperity in Venezuela, but we also see the competitiveness of Canadian oil, and we're investing, or we're putting in place measures so that that's going to happen.
Now, the Trump administration sent political shockwaves around the world with the weekend military raid saying the U.S. aimed to seize the country's oil reserves for American companies to exploit. In his statement, Premier Smith saying the situation emphasizes the importance of expediting the development of pipelines to diversify our oil export markets, and that the province is working to submit an application to the major projects office. Karen, let's start on the raid itself, the capture of Venezuela's president. What do you feel the world should take away from the actions of the Trump administration?
I think we can take Trump at his word when he's, made some imperialist overtures to other countries, both in South America and concerningly towards Greenland, saying that you're going to take over a NATO member is really concerning for the NATO alliance and the future of the alliance. Many leaders are coming forward. Canada has announced that they're establishing a consular office there in Greenland. So, leaders around the world are demonstrating that they're not in favor of the U.S. simply taking Greenland or any other country. And while many people in Venezuela are very relieved about Maduro being removed, we haven't had a regime change. It's simply the leader that's changed, and through what is essentially an illegal process. It wasn't approved by Congress. It isn't in alignment with international laws. So the outcome might be kind of okay, but the method is quite concerning. And is this how the United States means to operate going forward? I think that's a concern for Canada, especially.
Graham, what's to be made of how the rest of the world is responding, including our own national leadership?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the countries, Western countries, including Canada, of course, are being really careful how they talk about this. Saying it's good to bring some law and order to Venezuela and Maduro. No one's really shedding a tear over him being removed from power. But the allies are being really careful about not slamming Donald Trump for what, basically, in Karen's right, it was an illegal move. This is not backed by international law. In fact, it's against international law. But I think there's also this sort of fear as to what will Donald Trump do next? This is a major problem. Karen mentioned Greenland. It's also Canada. He's been talking about Canada becoming the 51st state, and Greenland. He wants to take over Greenland next, and Cuba might be in his gun sights. The thing is, when he does this, a lot of the allies are sort of saying, being really careful with this, very tepid response in many ways. This will, I think, only embolden Trump to do more. It's a huge question mark now about what are his next steps, not just about Venezuela, but other countries that he might be looking at taking over in some form, one way or the other, including Greenland.
Karen, where do you feel this will leave the urgency of conversations around the building of new pipelines to diversify the market for Alberta oil?
Both the Prime Minister and the Premier have said quite clearly that it remains a priority. Reinvigorating the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure in Venezuela will take, a good decade. It's going to rely on a lot of investment, and investment usually goes where things are stable. So maintaining or creating stability within Venezuela to attract the investment, that's when Venezuela becomes more of a competitor to the oil that Canada and Alberta specifically exports. So there is time. But we don't want to lose the urgency. We don't want to lose the sense of urgency in completing a pipeline to the West Coast and creating more markets for our oil.
To that point, Graham, there's been mixed response to the impact of the Americans controlling the flow of Venezuelan oil and what that could mean for Alberta crude sales down the road. But how likely is this to potentially be welcome news for the Smith government in the near term, especially where that support for a new pipeline is concerned?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a major issue in Venezuela, but it comes to a pipeline. Alberta wants a new pipeline, at least the government does, wants a new pipeline to the West Coast, and they got the MOU with the federal government. But in many ways, this hasn't changed anything. Those who are in favor of a pipeline, namely the premier and her supporters, are saying, look, Venezuela could be flooding the market really soon. We've got to build that pipeline as soon as possible. But as Karen points out, it could take a decade to get the Venezuelan infrastructure up and running at a major scale. And then those who are against the pipeline are pointing that out, saying, hey, listen, there's no need to panic because it could take a decade. And the thing is, what's going to happen with the demand for oil in a decade? Do we really need another pipeline? So you got these issues going on. And the key here is the private sector. Who's going to build that pipeline to the West Coast here? Who's going to spend billions of dollars and years in Venezuela to get their economy up and running and get their own economy, the energy economy up and running? So there's a lot of questions right now, and it comes down to who's going to be putting a lot of billions of dollars, but then quickly tied into Alberta's plan for a pipeline to the West Coast. It's tied in with the notion to get the Pathways Alliance carbon capture program underway, and that's a $16.5 billion plan to take emissions from the oil sands and pump them underground. $16.5 billion. The companies want government help. So to get a pipeline to the West Coast means getting the Pathways Alliance built and vice versa. The two are connected. So there's not just a case of, hey, Venezuela's been invaded, let's turn on the tap and get a new pipeline built. There's so many moving parts, and a lot of it relies on who is going to pay the cost of getting a new pipeline to the West Coast.
Yeah, lots of variables up in the air. Okay, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, getting a read on the surprise resignation of Alberta's Environment Minister. More from our panel in a moment. Welcome back. 2025 closed with a surprise resignation from the Smith cabinet.
Rebecca has served her province as a cabinet minister for over 6 years with distinction in a number of extremely challenging files.
The Premier responding to the New Year's Eve announcement by former Environment Minister Rebecca Schultz that she was leaving cabinet immediately and caucus in May. Grant Hunter has since been sworn in as Environment Minister. Graham, Rebecca Schultz did post a statement to social media announcing the resignation, but beyond saying that timing is everything in life and politics and that it's time to seek new career opportunities, she did not expound on specifics of the decision why. What do you see Albertans reading into that? Yeah,
this is a problem. Whenever, especially a minister, steps down from cabinet all of a sudden, and doesn't really explain other than, the timing. The timing is important, and she has other things on the horizon to do. And of course, people think, okay, timing, does that mean there's an election coming? And that is something that's been talked about. I wrote a column just a few weeks ago, appeared in Alberta Views magazine, on the possibility of an early election. Smith is saying, no, it's not going to happen. But boy, when you have a cabinet minister suddenly step down and not say it's for family reasons, whatever, it's very vague. Right now, you have a vacuum of information, and nature abhors a vacuum. So do pundits and journalists and other politicians. So they're all reading a lot into this, saying, "Why is she doing this? Does this mean something is happening inside the Smith government? Can we expect an early election?" I don't see that, but at the same time, without information, we'll start filling it with ideas and suggestions, and maybe even some conspiracies.
Karen, Rebecca Schultz is among the candidates who ran for leadership of the UCP after Jason Kenney stepped down. What does her resignation say to you, especially as a former MLA?
it's quite a surprise to see somebody go from running for the leadership of a party, then serving as a minister, to stepping down from cabinet and saying she's going to resign her seat. That's quite a departure within a fairly short amount of time. Although what has been said both by the minister, or the former minister, and the premier has been very complimentary. They've both said very nice things about each other. In terms of timing, I mean, who knows? It is purely speculative. What's happening in May? Is there somebody lined up for that seat in May? It just, there's really so little information to go on. It's really hard to understand the motivation behind it. Ms. Schultz is a very experienced politico. She did work on campaigns. She worked as political staff before running for election. So she understands the implications. I think this was very calculated on her part. And it could be something that's deeply personal that we don't have any insight to. I think we need to keep that in mind as well.
So, Graham, where do you feel this development leaves Danielle Smith? And should there be an expectation of maybe others in the UCP caucus following in Rebecca Schultz's footsteps?
Well, that's the thing. We didn't expect this to happen. And of course, right now, people will be digging into it, figuring out are there other people. If people start to drop, if other ministers start to quit, then all of a sudden, yeah, this is a big issue. If it's just a one-off, then no, this can pass. And we can, speculate all we want what it means. And Karen makes a good point. Like, this could be a very personal decision, and that's why she's not talking about it. It might not be political. It might just be certainly a personal issue has popped up. But yeah, so unless we see more people dropping out, you think back to Alison Redford. A lot of people were starting to quit cabinet. They were unhappy with her. So I think we're not seeing that happen with Smith. And I don't think we'll be seeing that happen with Smith. But hey, let's see what happens in 2026.
Karen, how do you see the Premier responding to this? And from your perspective, is it possible others may follow in the footsteps of Rebecca Schultz?
I mean, she followed a pretty standard process. She appointed someone else to cabinet. Grant Hunter, interestingly, has been an associate minister or a junior minister for quite a while. I think he was in the whip position prior to this. So a longtime bridesmaid finally moved up to become a bride. So that's interesting. The cabinet is still very, very large, the largest in history. In terms of other ministers, I mean, it's a really tight cabinet. There aren't a lot of leaks. We haven't really seen any dissatisfaction since Peter Guthrie left. So I don't have any insight into that. I'm really unsure. Like Graham said, it's a new year. It will be interesting to see what develops. But as far as is someone on the precipice, it's really unclear.
Well, and Graham, maybe as a closing thought, reflecting back on your perspective there on the prospect of an early election, timing around that May deadline that Rebecca Schultz has placed on leaving the caucus, does that say anything about the potential for timing of an election?
Well, if you believe an early election is coming, you could say, yes, this fits into the idea that maybe Schultz knows something's up and might not survive another election, and that's why she's leaving. But the thing is, an early election, I don't think it's going to happen. Others are saying, yeah, it definitely will happen. Smith keeps saying, no, it's not going to happen. I asked about this months ago, and she said, I'm sticking with that 2027, the fall of 2027. And then more recently, she said, I'm sticking with that timeline, the fall of 2027. So that also, I would say, there's too many things happening right now. Like, you've got that petition, for a separatist petition coming up. They're going to do that in the next, 3 or 4 months. Smith does not want an election with that playing in the background. She does not want separation to become a ballot box issue. So for that reason alone, I would say there's no election coming anytime soon. But, right now, dearth of information, and we'll start reading a lot of speculation into what could be relatively minor things, hoping to build a narrative as to figuring out what's actually happening in Alberta politics.
All right. We'll leave it there for time. Great to see you both. Thank you kindly for this.
It's been my pleasure.
Have a good night.